I still remember that electrifying moment as if it were splashed in neon across my very soul. The moment I learned that my wife's affair partner had dumped her, leaving her shattered and desperate, while I sat in stunned disbelief, wondering how the woman I once loved could fall so low. In those first 100 heartbeats, every hope I'd once nurtured about our future together crumbled into a storm of betrayal and stark realization. It was as if the world had tilted on its axis, and in that instant, I understood that life, with all its painful ironies, was about to rewrite itself in ways I never imagined. I knew then that our lives were diverging on a path paved by her mistakes, and that the aftermath of her humiliation would shape everything that followed. For years, I had watched our marriage drift into a quiet, unspoken undercurrent of discontent. I always believed that, despite its imperfections, we had built something lasting, a shared life grounded in dreams, quiet sacrifices, and mutual support. I poured my heart and soul into our future, often working long hours and making personal sacrifices so that we could secure a home, a stable life, and a sense of belonging. I trusted her implicitly, assuming that her occasional moments of vulnerability were just fleeting emotions in an otherwise strong relationship. But beneath that calm exterior, subtle cracks had been forming, glances away when I spoke, hushed phone calls when I wasn't in the room, and a growing emotional distance that I chose to ignore, clinging instead to the hope that our love would somehow mend those fissures. Then one day everything changed. Her affair partner, the one she had clung to for solace and excitement, dumped her abruptly. The news came like a shockwave, rippling through our lives with brutal clarity. I remember the phone call vividly, a terse, emotionless message relaying that he was done, that he no longer wanted to be involved. The message was simple yet devastating, and it left her reeling in a state of utter vulnerability. I witnessed the fallout, a maelstrom of raw emotions, from bitter regret to desperate pleading, as she scrambled to salvage what she could of her crumbling world. In the days that followed, the reality became undeniable. She was trying to rebuild her life with nothing but the shattered remnants of a romance that had, for all intents and purposes, failed. I spent countless hours reflecting on the twisted irony of it all. Here was a woman who had once looked down on me, sneering at my modest ambitions and belittling my quiet, steady successes, and now, faced with the collapse of her own world, she was scrambling in the wreckage of her lost affair. The humiliation was palpable. I wasn't sure whether I felt pity, anger, or a complex cocktail of both. It was as if the universe had finally set things right, yet the personal cost was staggering. I found myself questioning everything I had once believed about love, loyalty, and the promises that bind us. How could someone who once claimed to be above my world now be so desperate to piece it together, when she had the power to change everything with a single call? That night, as I sat in the quiet solitude of my study, I felt a melancholic chill settle over me, part sorrow, part cold resolve. I opened my journal, a worn, leather-bound repository of hopes and dreams, and began to write. Every word that I penned was an act of catharsis, a desperate need to make sense of the chaos and to reclaim the narrative of my own life. I detailed the endless nights of quiet sacrifice, the moments of silent pride when I thought our shared future was within reach, and the sudden, crushing blow of betrayal when she was left alone, trying to rebuild with nothing. My hand trembled as I recounted every memory, every small sign that I had perhaps overlooked. The pages filled with raw emotion, anger, hurt, and an emerging sense of clarity that I could no longer ignore. In that raw, vulnerable moment, I realized that her fall from grace was not simply a personal tragedy for her. It was a turning point for me. I had been caught in the web of her deceit for so long that I had nearly forgotten who I was. But as I looked back on every sacrifice, every sleepless night dedicated to our future, I began to see that my worth had never been tied to her choices. Instead, it was rooted in my own determination, my unwavering work ethic, and my ability to rise above every setback. I vowed then, in the quiet of that study, that I would no longer be defined by someone else's mistakes. I would reclaim my life, my success, and ultimately my identity. I resolved to take the lessons from this bitter chapter and transform them into the foundation for a future where I would thrive on my own terms, a future that would be a testament to resilience and self-belief. That night, the darkness outside seemed to echo the void that her betrayal had carved in my heart. Yet, as I continued to write, I felt a spark of hope begin to glimmer through the despair, a promise that every ending holds the seed of a new beginning. I envisioned a life where I would channel this pain into purpose, where I would build a legacy not defined by her scorn but by my own unwavering determination. I imagined the day when I would look back on this moment and see it not as a defeat, but as the catalyst that propelled me to heights I never thought possible. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I closed my journal and took a deep, steadying breath. I knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, both emotional and professional, but I was ready to face them. I would rebuild every shattered piece of my world, brick by painstaking brick, until I had constructed a future that was entirely, unequivocally my own. In that quiet, resolute moment, I promised myself that I would not let her betrayal define me any longer. My journey toward reclaiming my worth had begun, and nothing, not even the scars of a broken past, could stand in my way. In the weeks following that gut-wrenching realization, my life became a blur of sleepless nights, clandestine meetings, and a newfound resolve that pulsed like a war drum in my veins. Every morning I woke with the memory of her smug smile and the crushing betrayal still burning in my mind. The office, once a sanctuary where I'd nurtured my ideas and built my career, had turned into a battlefield where every ignored contribution and every stolen credit festered like an open wound. I found myself spiraling into a fervent need to reclaim what was rightfully mine, to prove that my dedication and talent were not just worthy of recognition but indispensable to the success of our company. I began by meticulously gathering every piece of evidence that confirmed my suspicions. Late into the night, with the only light coming from my flickering desk lamp, I combed through emails, saved chat logs, and pieced together meeting minutes. Each document was a shard of undeniable proof: slides I had designed, proposals I had written, and critical ideas that had been touted as her brilliant contributions, were all mine, transformed into her accolades without so much as a whisper of acknowledgement. The more I uncovered, the deeper the betrayal cut. I felt a surge of anger and humiliation every time I revisited those files. But beneath the rage lay a calm, calculating resolve. I would use this evidence as the foundation for my comeback. Emboldened by this truth, I began covertly discussing my plight with a few trusted colleagues who had quietly observed the shift in credit at our workplace. Over hushed conversations in empty conference rooms and behind closed office doors, I shared the documents that painted the true picture of my contributions. Their reactions were a mix of shock, anger, and solidarity. One colleague, a seasoned veteran in our department, leaned in and said, "We've all seen it, but no one dared to speak up. You deserve every bit of credit, and we're with you." That simple affirmation lit a spark in me. It wasn't just about setting the record straight, it was about reclaiming my identity and my future. I realized that my work was not just the sum of numbers and data, it was the embodiment of my passion, my late nights, and my relentless drive. I refused to let someone else's betrayal erase years of hard-won success. With the evidence meticulously compiled in a dossier that I guarded like a sacred text, I began to plot my next move. I knew that confronting her directly would only lead to a bitter, messy confrontation, one that would likely end in more hurtful words and an even deeper rift. Instead, I focused on the one person who held the ultimate power in our department: her boss. For months, I had admired him from afar. A man of integrity, a leader who valued substance over superficial appearances. I realized that if I could present him with an undeniable, comprehensive account of the misattributed work, it would force a reckoning that could not be ignored. I arranged a series of discreet meetings with my closest advisors at work. In these clandestine sessions, I presented the dossier, laying out every detail with clinical precision. We pored over the evidence late into the night, double-checking dates, comparing drafts, and ensuring that every piece of the puzzle was airtight. The more we reviewed, the clearer it became that this was not an isolated incident, it was a systematic pattern of misrepresentation and theft of intellectual property. The thoroughness of the evidence left little room for doubt, and our discussions grew heated with a shared sense of injustice. I felt a deep, righteous anger that spurred me on, transforming every bitter memory into a rallying cry for change. Armed with this incontrovertible evidence, I took the bold step of requesting a private meeting with her boss. I recall the day vividly, the cold, clinical ambience of his office, the stern yet curious look in his eyes as I laid out my case. I presented every email, every chat log, every meeting minute that demonstrated my contributions. I spoke with measured intensity, my voice steady even as my heart pounded with the enormity of what I was saying. I explained not only the facts but also the emotional toll it had taken on me, the countless hours I had sacrificed, and the sense of betrayal that had become almost unbearable. Her boss listened, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock, and finally, to a somber understanding as the gravity of the situation sank in. That meeting, charged with raw truth, became the turning point in my professional journey. I left his office with a mixture of relief and determination, relief that the truth was finally out, and determination to see that justice was served. In the aftermath, whispers of the incident began to ripple through the corridors of our company. I was cautious at first, wary of the repercussions and the potential fallout. Yet, as more evidence emerged and more colleagues began to speak up, the truth could no longer be contained. It spread like wildfire, and soon, the board of directors called for a formal investigation into the misappropriation of credit within our department. The ensuing inquiry was thorough and, in the end, devastating for her. The board, upon reviewing the indisputable evidence, had no choice but to take decisive action. Within a matter of weeks, she was confronted with the full weight of her actions, and ultimately, the company made the painful decision to terminate her employment. The process was not without its challenges. I was caught in a storm of office politics and personal vendettas, but I remained steadfast. I attended meetings with a calm conviction, supporting the investigation with every piece of evidence I had compiled. I stood by my truth, even as those around me whispered and wondered if I was being overly vindictive. But the more I saw the scale of the betrayal, and the more I realized that my ideas had been stolen time and again, the clearer it became that this was not about personal revenge. It was about integrity, fairness, and reclaiming what was rightfully mine. As the investigation unfolded, I found unexpected allies emerging within the company. Colleagues who had once hesitated to speak up began to step forward, sharing their own experiences of being sidelined and having their contributions ignored. Their stories echoed my own, forming a chorus of voices that demanded accountability. In a series of heated yet ultimately constructive meetings, the board deliberated and reviewed the evidence until the verdict was inevitable. The decision to let her go was a painful but necessary correction, a clear signal that the company would no longer tolerate the unethical appropriation of work and the distortion of merit. I watched as the day of her termination approached, feeling a complex mix of vindication, sadness, and the heavy realization that our lives were irrevocably diverging. Yet even as the professional consequences took shape, the emotional aftermath continued to ripple through me. I spent hours in therapy, processing the profound betrayal and the tumultuous journey that had followed. My therapist guided me through the process of understanding that while the pain was deep, it also had the power to ignite transformation. I began to see the investigation not merely as an act of retribution, but as a critical step in reclaiming my sense of self and proving to the world that I was more than the sum of my sacrifices. In our sessions, I learned to channel my anger into a quiet, unwavering resolve and to view every setback as an opportunity to rise even higher. Slowly, I began to let go of the lingering bitterness and embrace the possibility of a future built on my own terms. Outside the sterile walls of corporate meetings and therapy sessions, I also immersed myself in rebuilding my personal life. I reconnected with friends who had always seen the true me, beyond the role I had been forced to play as the overlooked contributor. We met for long, candid conversations over coffee, where we discussed not only the injustice of what had happened but also our own aspirations and dreams. Their unwavering support and honest feedback reaffirmed my belief that I was not defined by someone else's false accolades. I began to see that the very act of reclaiming my work was not just a professional victory, but a profound personal one, a liberation from the shadows of betrayal and a step toward a more authentic, self-affirming existence. During this period of intense professional and emotional upheaval, I also rediscovered the power of creative expression. I turned to writing as a way to process the torrent of emotions that coursed through me. Late into the night, I filled pages of my journal with detailed accounts of my journey, from the first shock of betrayal to the painstaking efforts to expose the truth. I started a private blog where I shared fragments of my experience, and the responses from readers were both heart-wrenching and inspiring. Strangers wrote to me recounting their own experiences of being overlooked and undervalued, and their words resonated with me deeply. I realized that by sharing my story, I was not only healing myself but also lighting the way for others who had faced similar challenges. The creative process became a vital outlet, a means of transforming raw, searing pain into a narrative of strength and determination. Every day, I structured my life with a disciplined routine that balanced the demands of my career with the need for personal healing. Mornings began with solitary runs through quiet streets, each step a meditation and a reaffirmation that I was in control of my destiny. I scheduled long hours at the office, dedicating myself to projects that challenged me and demanded innovation. Evenings were reserved for introspection, quiet moments spent in front of a computer reviewing my progress and writing down new strategies to further cement my future. This rigorous routine provided a steady rhythm to my days, anchoring me in the certainty that I was building a future defined by my own merit and determination. As the investigation concluded and the company's decision became final, I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. The termination of her employment was not merely a personal victory, it was a resounding affirmation that integrity and hard work would ultimately prevail. I watched as the news spread throughout the office, and I sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle yet unmistakable change in how people regarded me. The colleagues who had once looked on with pity or indifference now met my gaze with a newfound respect, and I could feel the balance of power shifting in my favor. It was a quiet vindication, a testament to the fact that when you stand up for your worth, the truth has a way of emerging no matter how deeply it's buried. In that period of transition, I began to lay out my vision for the future with meticulous care. I drafted a comprehensive roadmap that outlined not only my career goals but also the steps I would take to rebuild my personal identity. I set new, ambitious targets for professional growth, aiming to expand my responsibilities and spearhead innovative projects that would redefine our company's trajectory. I also began exploring opportunities for further education and leadership training, determined to equip myself with every tool needed to ensure that my future was secure and bright. Each plan, every strategy session, was imbued with the fervent determination to prove that I was capable of far more than what anyone had ever given me credit for. Throughout this arduous process, the emotional healing continued in parallel with my professional advancements. The sessions with my therapist became less frequent but more profound as I began to internalize the lessons of resilience. I learned to look at my scars as badges of honor, a map of the battles I had fought and a guide for the future I was determined to create. I started to see that the pain of betrayal was not a dead end, but a necessary passage to discovering the true measure of my strength. Each day as I checked my progress and observed the gradual rebuilding of my life, I felt a quiet pride swell within me, a pride born not from external accolades, but from the deep internal conviction that I was enough, and that my worth was unassailable. I also embraced the power of community, reaching out to others who had experienced similar betrayals. I attended support groups and networking events, where candid conversations about overcoming professional and personal setbacks provided both solace and inspiration. Hearing the stories of others and sharing my own reinforced the idea that I was part of a larger tapestry of resilience. It was in those moments of communal vulnerability that I found the courage to let go of the lingering bitterness and to instead channel that energy into building a future where every setback was a setup for a monumental comeback. As the months passed, the culmination of my efforts began to crystallize into a new reality. My professional achievements were now a powerful counterpoint to the humiliation of that long-ago meeting. I had not only regained the recognition I deserved but had propelled my career into new heights that seemed unimaginable before. Every new project, every innovative idea implemented, was a step further away from the past and a leap toward a future defined by my own success. I could see the outlines of a future where I was not only a respected leader but also an inspiration to those who had once doubted their own potential. In the midst of this transformation, I started to document the journey more publicly. I compiled a series of essays and detailed journal entries that chronicled every stage of my struggle, from the first crushing moments of betrayal to the gradual emergence of my renewed self. I published these writings on a private blog, sharing the raw, unfiltered truth of my experiences with a small, supportive audience. The feedback was overwhelming. Messages of encouragement, shared stories of similar hardships, and expressions of gratitude for the honesty that resonated with so many. Those responses fortified my resolve, reminding me that my journey was not just a personal battle, but a universal narrative of redemption and resilience. Every day, I moved forward with a mix of disciplined routine and spontaneous moments of introspection. I cherished the small victories, the nod of approval from a mentor, the successful launch of a project that I had spearheaded, the financial reports that showed steady growth, and the quiet moments when I caught a glimpse of my reflection and saw the strength that had emerged from the turmoil. I knew that the road ahead was still long and fraught with challenges, but with every step, I grew more confident that I was crafting a legacy built on hard work, integrity, and the unwavering belief that I was destined for greatness. In those final, transformative months, I began to envision the full scope of the future I was building, a future where my professional achievements would serve as a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever been underestimated. I mapped out plans to further expand my business, invest in groundbreaking projects, and even mentor a new generation of professionals who could learn from my journey. Every strategy session, every discussion with trusted advisors, was a reminder that I was in control of my destiny, and that no one's shallow judgments could ever diminish the light of my ambition. By the time I realized that the storm of betrayal had finally given way to a clear, radiant horizon, I understood that my transformation was complete. I had taken every ounce of pain and turned it into a force that propelled me to new heights. The wounds of the past, once raw and all-consuming, had healed into scars that now served as symbols of my resilience. I had built not just a career or a portfolio, but a life defined by my own values. A life where success was measured in integrity, innovation, and the courage to overcome even the deepest betrayals.